Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here today. I want to recognize the presence of Congressman Earl Blumenauer, who's joined us today as part of the audience, and thank Senator Corker, my good friend, for joining with me today. On June 6th of this year, just a few weeks ago, the 118-year-old swing bridge in Norwalk, Connecticut, which connects Boston to New York via our Amtrak line, frankly, connects Boston to Washington, D.C. It got stuck in the open position over the Norwalk River. Thousands of rail commuters were stranded. They waited for hours. They had to be cleared by buses, and Connecticut and New York lost millions of dollars in economic productivity. It was a colossal nightmare, but it's not the first time that this particular bridge has failed. In fact, the last 170 times that the DOT in Connecticut has tried to open it, it's failed 16 times. It's 118 years old. You can't get from Boston to New York or to Washington, D.C. on a train without it. And it frankly just represents the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how broken our nation's infrastructure is. There's a walk bridge in every state and in every region, and we're losing hundreds of millions of dollars in economic productivity because we're failing to invest in our nation's roadways and rails. And as you know, both Republicans and Democrats acknowledge this program. You're not going to find virtually any member of Congress who is proposing to spend less money on infrastructure over the next 10 years. All we're arguing over is whether we're going to continue to borrow from China and other lenders to finance these improvements, or whether we're going to make the tough choices to pay for it ourselves. But our current policy, which is intentionally underfunding transportation, leaving a gaping $18 billion hole in our budget, it's hurting our economy. It's killing jobs because of specific instances like the Walk Bridge, but also because investment stalls in this country when investors have no idea when they build a factory whether or not they're going to be able to get their people and goods to and from their facility. So Senator Corker and I are here today because we are sick and tired of Congress talking about fixing our transportation funding shortfall and avoiding specifics simply because the solutions are politically uncomfortable. Money is not going to fall off trees or sprout out of the ground to fill the funding gap that exists today. And so it's time to start putting some concrete ideas on the table to frame a real discussion about how to fix this problem. So today we are proposing a 2-year phased-in increase in the gas tax that would simply account for inflation over the last 20 years since that user fee was last increased. 6 cents in 2014, 6 cents in 2015. And we're also proposing to fix this problem once and for all in the long term by indexing this fee to inflation going forward. This will raise enough money to fill the current gap and perhaps modestly increase our ability to make some long overdue infrastructure investments over the next decade. And we recognize, and Senator Corker will talk a little bit about this, we recognize that we've got to have a balanced tax policy, and that's why we're proposing that this user fee be paired with a corresponding decrease in other taxes. One option would be to pair a gas tax increase with a long-term extension of certain tax provisions that are part of the so-called tax extenders package, but we're willing to listen to other ideas on how to offset this modest increase in the highway user fee. We recognize that this is a politically difficult issue. That's why there haven't been any bipartisan proposals until today, but we think that now is the time for some political courage to try to break the ice on finding a long-term funding solution for our nation's aging roads and rail lines. If other senators have different ideas, we welcome them, but the solution cannot ignore the problem and let thousands of road projects stop work all across the country this summer. And the solution shouldn't be to just punt again and continue to ask our kids to pay for these projects by continuing to steal from the general fund to fill the funding gap. I talked to Senator Reid and Senator Boxer and Senator Wyden on my side of the aisle about the proposal, and I know that they welcome it as part of the debate. We are glad to have a broad array of support from outside of this building. It's rare that you get a proposal that has both the support of labor unions and the Chamber of Commerce, but we have statements of support that we're glad to share with you from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, from the the operating engineers, from the laborers union, as well as from Building America's Future, which is the bipartisan group that's been put together by Governor Ed Rendell and Governor Schwarzenegger and Secretary LaHood and others as well as groups like AAA and Transportation for America. So we think we've put on the table a common sense bipartisan proposal that will help kickstart this debate moving forward. We're glad to have so much support from the community of advocates that have been pushing for a long-term solution to this problem, and we're hopeful that over the course of the summer we'll have the corresponding political courage amongst our colleagues to work with us to try to get a real solution to this problem in the long run. So with that, let me turn the podium over to Senator Corker.
Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here with Senator Murphy. I work with him daily on the Foreign Relations Committee. I have found him to be someone who's thoughtful and willing to take on the tough issues, and I'm glad to join him today at the podium. I'm from Tennessee. We're from very different places, and in Tennessee, we're conservative. And what that means to me, growing up there and starting a business there and being involved in some public service there, is if something's important enough to have, it's important enough to pay for it. What we have in Tennessee is the second best road system in the nation. Let me say that one more time. Tennessee has the second best road system in America. Does not have one penny of debt. Unlike so many other places, Tennessee is paid for the infrastructure that it has. And what you'll find in almost every magazine is people are flocking to Tennessee to start businesses because of that. When I got to Washington, I learned of a different way of doing business. It's not one that I want to be a part of. But it's one where people on the left and right huff and puff about paying for things. But at the end of the day, if it's broadly popular, has a lot of support, at the end of the day, after playing chicken, people on both sides of the aisle will throw their children under the bus, borrow money to make it happen. That to me is not conservative. That to me is not prudent. In the course of that, what happens is each year the road program, is it going to go? Is it going to stop? People all across our country that head departments of transportation and highway programs don't know if the money's coming. They're pretty sure that at the end of the day, Congress will end up kicking the can down the road and borrowing money to make it happen. But instead of going ahead and investing in Caterpillar equipment and other kinds of equipment and building an economy and having some certainty, each year we get to this point. As a matter of fact, over the next 30 days, it's likely that Congress will do the same cowardly thing that it's done year after year after year, and that is play chicken at the last minute, come up with some gimmick that we know does not pay for the program, and kick the can down the road. I know that we're not going to pass this in the next month. It's unfortunate. Our goal is to build support for this over the course of the next 6 months. We know that towards year end, Finance Committee is looking at some longer term solutions. We know that for Republicans, many of which are pledged to something through ATR, we know for this to be supported that the tax increase we're talking about for gasoline, which, by the way, the last time we did this was back in 1993. The buying power of the gasoline tax at that time, today, is 63% of what it was at that time. And so, again, we continue to backfill each year with general fund money that's not paid for. We know that the Finance Committee is working on some longer-term solutions. Matter of fact, I haven't talked to a soul about infrastructure on the floor on either side of the aisle that doesn't know that ultimately this is what we have to do. I haven't talked to a soul that doesn't understand this is what we have to do. And so what we're hoping to do is over the course of this summer and fall is build support for this kind of solution. Back to the ATR pledge that many of my colleagues may be bound to. Each year we also do something, it's called the extenders package. We do it on a short-term basis. Matter of fact, believe it or not, it's June the 18th, and we still haven't passed the extenders package for this year. It's likely to be something that's done at year end. If you just made the more broadly supported actual economic growth elements of that permanent, and just the elementary ones, research and development, the 179 agreement that allows small business to take 50% of a deduction on a capital expenditure that year, if you just extended those and made them permanent, which we've been doing for 20 years, by the way, extending them on an annual basis, we know it's going to be policy. So if you just did that simultaneously with increasing this gasoline tax, you'd have an offset. And therefore, Republicans who may be bound by the ATR pledge would be able to support something that actually put permanency and certainty into the road program and at the same time not violate that pledge. We're having conversations with members of the Finance Committee. By the way, let me say one other thing. Making those extenders permanent makes it easier to do tax reform. Let me say this one more time. Making those extenders permanent makes it easier to do tax reform because it builds in a base that allows you to actually look at reforms that, again, generate economic growth. We're going to leave that work to the Finance Committee. We've had conversations with them. Our purpose today is to say, look, if something's worth having, let's pay for it. I don't know of any citizen in my state that doesn't believe that having infrastructure is important. I'll also add, by the way, a second position for me would be to say if Americans don't think it's important, let's fund it at the levels that are now coming in. But the last thing we need to do is to make ourselves look good by throwing our kids under the bus, which is what we do every single year here in Washington. So I'm glad to be here with Senator Murphy. We're glad to take questions. We're glad to begin this debate. We're glad to participate in something that we believe is important to our country. We come at it from different places, different states. But again, I come from a state where if something's important enough to have, it's important enough to pay for. It's very different than the mentality that I've experienced over the last 7.5 years in Washington. And in the process, over the last 7.5 years, I've watched personally as our country has gotten weaker. So with that, I'll be glad to take questions.
Hi, just for clarification, has this actually been introduced, or do you plan to introduce it as legislation?
We haven't introduced it as formal legislation yet because we acknowledge that ultimately this is going to be passed as part of a package coming out of the Finance Committee and the EPW Committee. So we have a fairly concrete proposal here with numbers behind it, and we'll be forwarding that on to the two relevant committees.
We also do have legislation, and we're going to discuss with the Finance Committee the best way to go forward, but it's very simple. It is using the existing system. Let me say this: there have been ideas floated to avoid confronting this head on. There's been a barrel tax that people have talked about. There's been a refinery tax that people have floated. And those are all interesting, except that the existing system we have is really a user pay system. If you try to take this to another level, first of all, it's much more difficult to implement. But secondly, you're actually catching a lot of people that have nothing whatsoever to do with using cars to drive on roads. So we think this is the most straightforward way of dealing with it. We understand American people will understand this, and we understand. But we believe this is the appropriate way to deal with a user fee program.
Yeah. Senator Corker, have you started talking to your Republican colleagues about this, and what's been their reaction so far?
Again, I have talked to a number of people about it. I don't know of any person that I've talked to that doesn't understand this is what we should do. We live in a world up here in Washington. I'm probably veering off here. No better example was last Wednesday afternoon, where if something's popular, people are willing to do it all day long and not pay for it. And the road program is probably the most popular program that we have in our country. So again, people understand we cannot continue to do this. I think people on both sides of the aisle are embarrassed each year when we get to this point where we're playing chicken, where, again, people all across the country wonder if the program's going to be extended. They know that it is, but they know some gimmick likely is to be put in place. And so, again, I don't know of anybody who doesn't, let me say one of two, either say we need to put a gasoline tax in place, or we just need to fund what's coming in. And again, I think most Americans want to see us continue to improve our infrastructure. This is the best solution. But for me, a step back place would be to say, okay, well, if we're not going to do this, let's at least quit borrowing from our kids, and let's at least fund the program with the amount of money coming in. I think this is the right solution.
I just add, I mean, there is no white knight coming to rescue the transportation fund. We can spend the next 3 years searching for a new magical funding solution, but it's likely that the best option is staring us straight in the face. And I think from a strategic standpoint, we're trying to do two things. One, we think it's important to break the ice and show that there's a bipartisan willingness to confront this issue. And two, we're trying to put a creative idea on the table to bring Republicans who know this is the right thing to do to be able to vote for it. And that's why we've made the suggestion to pair it together with some revenue offsets.
What do you all think of the House Republican plan, ending Saturday postal delivery?
I mean, listen, I think it's a gimmick, and the point of our proposal is to try to solve this problem for the long term. So that's in part why I was attracted to making this proposal, because I think it's time to end these short-term gimmicks.
Let me just say something on that. I've bitten my tongue as I've read that. Only in Washington would you take money from one insolvent enterprise to fund another insolvent enterprise. Only in Washington. So
better said.
Senators, how much money would, if you get the 12 cents increase over 2 years, how much money does that raise?
So we actually have it in the presser that we're sending out to you, but
essentially, yeah, it's essentially $18 billion, which is actually both the amount of the shortfall and also the amount that would have been raised over the course of the 20 years since it's last been raised, and that's $18 billion over a year.
It's $164 billion over 10.
So in the meantime, as your chart says, the fund is going to run out soon.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? What should be done in the interim?
Well, the same thing will happen this summer that's happened for the last 4 times, and that is some gimmick will be created to make it look like it's being paid for when it's not. The interesting thing that Washington also does is it spends money in 1 year, but it pays for it over 10 on so many occasions. Now, come on. I mean, nothing can be worse, especially when you know it's recurring year after year after year. Think about that. Think about the multiplier effect. Think about how that throws our kids under the bus. And so that's what will happen this summer is there'll be some gimmick. Maybe it's a pension smoothing or something like that over 10 to spend money for a 6-month period of time, again, putting our country further in debt. That's what will happen first. And our goal is, knowing that, I obviously will not support something like that, as I haven't in recent times. But hopefully by year end, something will happen where, and this is hopefully going to be a part of that, where we actually permanently solve this problem.
Senator Corker, will this violate ATR's tax pledge?
It will not. Again, we've done some work and had some phone conversations with them. For instance, if you just took the standard, these are broadly supported tax extenders. It's a great question. Thanks for asking it. The R&D tax credit, 179 expensing, state and local sales tax deductions, teacher deductions, transit parking parity, and land donated for conservation deductions. If you just took those, we do them each year, but you made them permanent. I don't think there's anybody that disputes making those permanent, by the way. That alone would generate $189 billion in savings over the next 10 years. So again, if Finance Committee chose to link this proposal that Senator Murphy and I are putting forth with that, again, something that's non-controversial, and make it permanent instead of extending it each year, usually after the year's gone, you would not be violating the pledge. And we have certified that to be true. Okay? Yes, sir.
Senator Wyden has said that he wants the Finance Committee to come up with a bipartisan solution by the end of the month. Do you have any hope, given that we're more than halfway through June, of getting this in there, or getting conversations with him?
No, I think we're realistic that it's unlikely we're going to be able to get a long-term 10-year solution in the next 30 days. So I think we're both very open in saying that there's likely to be a short-term fix. But Senator Wyden, having just spoken to him about an hour ago, Senator Wyden is laser-like focused on solving this problem for the long term at the end of this year. So, my hope is that if there is a short-term funding solution, it should be as short-term as possible, so that right after the election we can get to work on a long-term solution. But I don't think it's likely that we're going to get anything beyond a patch.
Yes.
Well, question for Senator Corker. Yeah. The Highway Trust Fund has had to rely on general fund transfers since I think around 2008. It has not the gas tax revenue.
Yeah.
What led you now at this point to support a gas tax increase?
Yeah, in August of 2009 I voted no, and March of 2010 I voted no, and March of 2012 I voted no. It was voice voted once in 2008 without any kind of vote. But on all of those occasions I've opposed the gimmicks that we used, again, to make us all look good in front of the American people, but again, throw our children under the bus. And I'm finally just to a point where I realize this cannot go on. I think, look, I know that the best way for the highway program to work is on a user fee basis. That's the way it's been set up. That's the way our state has done it, candidly, and that's the reason our state has no debt relative to our roads. But I just think we're at a point in time where it's time for us to finally deal with this issue. And again, I don't know of anybody on the floor that wants to maintain the funding at the federal level for infrastructure that doesn't agree this is the only real way to do it. Now, you can disguise it with a barrel tax, or you can disguise it with a refinery tax. Again, then you're catching a lot of people that have nothing to do with transportation. This is the most direct, simplistic way to build on a system that has worked with us for a long time. Let me just mention something. I know there's a lot of discussion right now about the fact that oil prices are going up because of what's happening in Iraq. And again, we are proposing this to happen by year end. But I just want to point out the fluctuations in prices that exist at the pump. In the year 2013 alone, there was a 47-cent fluctuation in that 1 year in prices. In 2012, again, because of world instability and other issues, 59-cent fluctuation in prices. In 2011, believe it or not, there was an 82-cent fluctuation in prices. So, people talk about when's a good time, when's a bad time. I think it's a good time for us to begin facing up to the obligations that we have. I'd like for us to do it on a lot of other fronts, Medicare, Social Security, all kinds of other fronts, and have proposed concrete changes for those. This is one where hopefully, again, the American people support infrastructure. Hopefully over the course of the next 6 months we'll live up to our obligations and actually fund it on a year-in, year-out basis as we actually spend the money. It would be a really great step forward for bipartisan responsibility.
And just as a point of comparison, I mean, we hope that our proposal will have a reasonable plus-up in the funding available for infrastructure, but it will still leave the United States spending 3% of our GDP on infrastructure compared to Europe, which is spending 6%, and China, which is spending 12%. So we think this is a reasonable proposal, but it still leaves the United States spending significantly less than other countries and continents.
Both of you are pushing your party leadership kind of out of their comfort zone a little bit with this. What has the reaction been from them?
I mean, reaction on the Democratic side has been very positive. Again, I talked to Senator Wyden multiple times throughout this process. Talked to him again this morning. Spoke to Senator Reid about it, and I think that on our side of the aisle, we recognize that it's time to stop talking theoretically and start talking in really practical terms. I think it's important for this to be bipartisan. I think it's unlikely that I would have done this without partnership across the aisle, because we certainly understand that this can't get done in December without bipartisan support.
We will see.
All right, thank you, everybody.